So today I'm going to show you how I sweat copper pipe fittings to make connections like this to this hot water tank. So let's jump into it. Okay, before I get started here, I want to kind of explain what I'm doing with this hot water tank. I had to replace it recently, so I knew I wanted to put a wash basin here in the garage shop next to the hot water tank. So it wasn't a better time than now to put in my supply legs to that. So I have a cold water connection here and a hot water connection here. I did mount valves right here so that I can turn them on and off to service the basin, but they also provide a means to have the water off until I get to that. So I'm using the cold water leg here in my example of how to sweat pipes, so let's get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start assembling this little section that's going to supply the hot water tank with cold water, as well as the leg that I'm putting in for the wash basin that's going to be adjacent to it. Like I said, since I'm doing the hot water tank and replacing it, I'm going to go ahead and put the this leg in that I need for that supply to the basin now. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a few sections of this 3/4 inch pipe that will connect the T to this adapter and one here, and then I'm going to do a little short section here for this this connection to this side of the valve so that the tubing can connect into it that way to the hot water tank. Now I could probably use the nipple here, but I'm going to go ahead and sweat this and make this just a little sub-assembly. I have the parts, so I'm going to use them that way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to determine how long I need to make these little sections so that I have just a little bit of a space between here so that I can sweat the fittings together. So an easy way that I find is I bottom these out, and then I take a pencil and I just kind of mark an area here or a mark here for that length, and I'm going to double this and then add whatever I want between there. So first thing I'm going to do is find out how much I got to go in. It's approximately 3/4 inch, so I'm going to go 1.5 inches and then another 1/2 inch between the two. So I'm going to cut a few sections that are about 2 inches in length here. So let me measure it. Once I measure one, I'll have them all. Now I can go a little bit more just to make sure that I'm not having any issues, so I'm going to go 2 1/4. It'll make my legs a little bit longer, but we'll fit it all in and adjust the tubing bends accordingly. So the first thing is I'm going to take my cutter and I'm going to align the knife with the mark. And the seam here on this cutter is basically what your location is. So now I'm going to take this and rotate this around. Now I'm rotating the pipe versus the cutter itself. In a few turns you'll get through it. Now I have one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all the sections that I need. I need a total of 3, 1, 2, and 3 for these connections here. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark it. Now it doesn't need to be a precise length, just something that'll get us to close to the length we need. I'm going to make sure I seat that in all the way, and then I'll just rotate this pipe around, get another piece cut. So there's another one, and it came out pretty close to the same length, so I'm going to cut the last one here for the cold water side. Again, just a rough dimension. Push it all the way into my cutter, make sure it's seated. Alright, so now I have all three of my lengths. You notice this one's just a little bit longer, not by much, but just enough to, you know, you don't have to worry about. So now, like I said, you want to clean your fittings really good. I had a instructor who took a buildings trade course in my early years, and the plumbing instructor, he always said, make sure you clean them like a baby's butt. I think he used the word ass, but Mr. Widge Habits, that's a name you don't forget. So I'm gonna clean these fittings real good. Now again, I'm using a Scotch Brite pad here. You can use sandpaper. Problem with sandpaper is when you're working in a wet area, the paper gets a little bit moist and doesn't do as good a job. Scotch Brite seems to handle the moisture okay. So again, you want to get it as clean as you possibly can. A little bit of effort here saves you plenty of time during the sweating process. And I'm just going to hit it, the inside of this to kind of clean up the burr a little bit. Nice and shiny, so I'm going to do all the parts this way. As you can see, my hands are starting to get a little bit dirty from this. Now you're going to do the inside of all the fittings. Trying to just stick it in here and I hate these little stickers because when you go to sweat, these burn and leave a mark. I'll most likely clean that off when I'm done sweating the parts together. Basically, you want to make sure you get all the oxidization off of the copper. Nice clean surface. Take your time with this. This is the most important part of when you're sweating fittings together, is making sure that you get a nice clean surface. One step you don't want to shortcut. fit on that one. Kind of want to look at your fittings when you go to buy them. Just make sure they're not damaged, dented, or anything like that. Otherwise, you're not going to get a good seal as well. And you're not going to get a good sweat fitting. If you have to really press these parts together, you want them to be able to slide in nice and easy. Okay, I have them all cleaned up now. You got a nice finish on all of them inside. The little fittings are nice and clean. And I'm gonna go ahead and put some gloves on because your hands are gonna get it pretty messy. I always pick up these gloves like from Harbor Freight. They go on sale. It's got a nice little rubber grip in here, allow you to hold the parts real good, plus kind of protect your hands from some of the flux. It gets on there and it gets kind of messy. I'm gonna move this out of the way. And now what I'm gonna do is kind of put them all together, and I'm gonna apply a little bit of flux to them. I have this type here, and then I'm just gonna use a brush. Get a little bit on the brush, doesn't take much. And you're gonna do the inside of all the fittings. Get a good coat on here. A little more on the brush. It's kind of cold here in Arizona during this season, so typically I have this paste is almost a liquid for me, but just going to smear some on here, get a generous amount, as you can see. Just make sure you coat everything inside. A little bit more. And this will act a little bit like a lubricant and help the parts slide together good. You can't really overdo flux, but you want to be generous with it, but not too much. You don't want a big mess when you're soldering, because it will melt down and flow. I tend to go back over them just to make sure I hit them. Now I'm going to put a little bit on each one of the sections of copper pipe that I cut. Nice glob on there. Mr. With a Cabbage, take a look at that, wherever you may be, if you're still with us. Now flux has a little bit of acids in it. It helps clean the surface as well, but it really lets the solder flow really well. So we'll just put a nice generous coat on all those. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them together and pre-fit everything. Take a piece and stick it in. Now see here, that one slid in good, a little bit tight at first, but no big deal. I'm going to put my fitting on like that. This tee here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go one direction. I did put a little flux on this one, but this is the one that's going to get connected to the supply line coming directly out of the wall. And then, so now I have those put together and I can sweat them. And I'm going to go ahead and put this little coupler that I put together as well. So I have a little bit of distance here. That way I can get the solder to flow around it. If you go too tight, sometimes you're not going to get the solder to flow really well, and it's kind of hard to fix it if you have to. So I'm going to move my vise over here, and I'm going to position this in here in a way that I can get all the fittings sweated together. So I'm just going to go just a real light press on this so that I don't damage it. I'll just put it up here. Let's see, get it in here. And then I'll be able to, whoop. That works pretty good. I'm going to take a little bit of the solder and get it started here. Want to give yourself a nice length of it so your hands and your fingers aren't real close to where the flame will be. Now it's really important when you go to sweat a fitting, you don't put heat directly on the pipe, you put it on the fitting itself and then just let the solder flow around it. As soon as it picks up the heat, you'll see it go suck in. As soon as it sucks in, you want to be done. You don't want to overdo it. Now you see how that's sucked in around there? Now I'll just wipe around a little bit here. Get a good seal. If you only do it from one spot, it will actually flow all the way around the fitting and seal it off. So right now that's a good seal, not too much solder. So now again, I'm going to position my torch so it's on the fitting. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Now if you notice, it looks like there wasn't any solder around this area here on that part. I'm just going to hit it again just to ensure that I get it. Got to get in here. So I had some water laying over there on the floor. I'm just going to be able to grab this. And I want to rotate this so that I can actually see what I'm getting at here. And I can see that it seemed to make a nice seal all the way around there. The solder sucked in good. So now I'm going to hit this with heat. Get myself a little extra solder sitting out here. Move the rag so I don't burn it. Just apply a heat to the fitting. And we'll let that cool. Should be nice and sealed all the way around it. Get a little more water and hear how hot it is. Just examine to kind of make sure it looks like everything's sealed good. Set that aside and let that cool. Now we'll set this guy up to get it done. So as you can see, you don't, it's not really hard to do. You just have to be patient a little bit, make sure the cleaning is done good. And now, as you can see, it dripped down here on the pan. That's why I take an old cookie sheet that we have, and it catches it and it doesn't burn the surface that you're working on. You can pick these up pretty cheap. I think I got this from a food supply one. It's a pretty large one. So, kind of a little bit messy on that one. But I can always clean it up if I need it to look perfect. Again, heat right on the fitting, and you can see how that's sucked in. I'm going to try to clean this one up a little bit by hitting some heat on it. And that should about do that for that fitting. You can see that one's a little loose. I can turn it. When I grabbed it, it came loose. So I didn't let it cool off enough. So just to ensure, I'm going to go back and hit it again. You got to be careful with reheating. You could create yourself a leak point. It's always nice when you do the sweating and you think you have everything put together really good, and you turn on the pressure and all of a sudden you have a little pinhole somewhere. And then you got to try to get the water all evacuated from the line, so otherwise you won't be able to re-sweat it. Seems nice and tight now. It's not so much about it being tight. It'll hold with just a little bit of solder, but you want to make sure it's sealed all the way around it. So I'm going to let these cool. So that took care of the cold water connections. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the hot water connection. Okay, now I have all the lines connected to the system. As you can see, all the sweat fittings that we did earlier, they're all in place and connected to the hot water tank. I do have the system pressurized, and there doesn't appear to be any leaks anywhere in any of these fittings. That was the first time. There was no repairs needed to be done. Just to prove that we have water in the system, I'm going to go ahead and open this valve very carefully. So I hope you see how easy it is to actually sweat copper pipes. As long as you're patient and you clean your fittings and your pipe really well and apply flux and heat directly to the fitting itself, anyone can do this. So if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. And if you liked what I did here, please give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more things like this, please hit the subscribe button and the alert so that you know when the next video is out. Again, thank you for stopping by.